Más en la mitad, ¿no? Cata, ¿cuál es el que si Moira quiere de últimas? Moira quiere de últimas. ¿Sentarse de última? No, hablar de última. Entre las últimas. ¿Cuál? ¿Sabes? Sí. Sí.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel on epistemic communities. So the idea is we'll be discussing climate change problems, climate change justice as well, problems with mitigation, adaptation, and the central question for that we'll be discussing in this panel and with all of you is what types of knowledge are included in the climate debates? What types of knowing the world and relating to the world? So recently, or not so recently anymore, but there has been an opening to the inclusion of scientific knowledge, for example, when it comes to climate litigation or to framing social justice problems related to climate change. So scientists, natural scientists, have been gaining more and more space in the climate debates, joining, for example, litigants who take cases to court to debate the very existence of climate change, but also its effects and what would be the best mitigation and adaptation policies or decisions, for example, or how climate change affects different communities or different species as well. So there's been an opening in the field to the inclusion of natural scientists in climate litigation, for example, and this opens up many questions about different disciplines or scientific disciplines that should be integrated or included in the climate debates, but also more than that, different types of knowledge, which tipos de conocimiento, which types of knowledge or relating to the world are really included in these debates and which ones are not, and exactly, what are we missing in this whole debate? So we have an excellent panel to discuss these questions. With me, I have, to my right, my dear friend and colleague, Esmeralda Colombo. Esmeralda is a Marie Curie Fellow at the Italian Institute for International Political Studies, and she has a PhD in law from the University of Bergen. I have Anand Bhopal. He is a PhD candidate at the University of Bergen, at the Bergen Center for Ethics and Priority Setting within the Department of Global Public Health and Primary Care at the UiB, Faculty of Medicine. So you're a medical doctor. Esmeralda is a lawyer and a legal scholar. We also have Moira Milan. Next to Esmeralda, we have Moira. Moira is a Mapuche human rights activist and writer. She is from Argentina. She is one of the leaders of the indigenous ancestral lands recovery movement, and she also works to defend women's rights of the 36 indigenous nations that live in Argentina. Jan Robieu-Dupont, to my left, is a climate scientist and consultant. He has been working with NGOs and policymakers and diplomats, including at UN climate negotiations. So he's one of the people whose scientific knowledge has been used to inform climate negotiations. And currently he's a Marie Curie Fellow at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands. And we have Tatiana Alfonso, who is very kindly translating. So we will speak a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of English, and you are very welcome to post questions at the end in both languages. Okay, so first, Esmeralda, I think this panel, we owe you the existence of this panel because you have been working on the notion of epistemic communities, and you have been discussing and exploring and reflecting on how these are useful for in the climate context. So please introduce a little bit the topic. What does it mean? What are epistemic communities, and why are they important for us?
Thank you so much, Catalina. This is the $1 million question. What are epistemic communities? But just to check the waters, how many of you know the term epistemic communities, have heard it before? Just check, just very quickly. Okay, so a little less than half, I would say 40%, which is not bad at all. But about the rest, don't worry. It's not common to know what epistemic communities are, not even for lawyers. So for my generation of lawyers, epistemic communities were studied first in deep 30 years ago by political scientist Peter Haas as a knowledge-based network of experts, usually transnational, that enjoy high social authority, share ideas on causal relationships, and see those ideas institutionalized, for example, in international treaties. But Haas' ideas of epistemic communities is limited to the natural scientist. And why? Think of the word episteme, knowledge system. We go back to Plato's philosophy, to the dichotomy between episteme, knowledge, exact knowledge, and doxa, opinion. So epistemic communities tell the truth, which is the 20th century idea of what scientists should do. Tell the truth to power. But the problem is that in the 20th century, we also saw a shift in expectations from the normative, law, morality, politics, to the social, the economy, science, technology. This is really the shift that several sociologists have explored, like Gunther Teubner, this idea that we all need to take collective responsibility, epistemic responsibility to how science is molding areas of policymaking. It has never been so influential as since last century. So I totally understood Haas' mission and imagination behind this idea of epistemic communities being just a natural scientist. But how about the social scientist? I was studying this topic within my PhD on climate litigation, and I saw continuous examples of lawyers collaborating with scientists like Jan, who has very good examples on this, that were bringing expert reports or amicus curiae about how science should be understood in specific climate cases. And this is the question that I sent back to my co-panelists about the transformation. How can epistemic communities be mobilizing for more ecological justice and not just climate justice, energy justice? How can we really bring about disciplines to reach common goals? And what do we actually mean by epistemic? Is it just exact knowledge? We live in post-truth society, in postmodern science. Do we still believe in this? So I will just leave the floor to you all and just two reflections also from the public later on.
Thank you so much, Esme. Thank you. So I think I will first ask you to tell us a little bit of your work from natural sciences in touching upon the climate change topic, climate change problems, your contributions or your suggestions as to how science needs to be used in the climate debate. And later on, then I will move to ask Moira to please react or tell us what's your view on epistemic communities and what's your view on how science, but also different types of knowledge can be used for this. So Anand, yes.
I was just telling Jan that she was actually looking at you. He said, no, he's looking at you. She's looking at you. Now I need to go back to the question. Well, hi, everyone. So firstly, my name is Anand Bhopal. I'm a medical doctor. I'm from the UK, and I'm now studying my PhD here in Norway. I've been studying an emerging phenomenon, which is the medical profession around the world mobilizing on the issue of climate change. This has kind of been ongoing for some time, maybe 20 years, but really over the last 5 years, and really the duration of my PhD, it's sped up. And really it's hurtling downhill, or in a good way. It's hurtling downhill, it's gathering momentum. And it's got me thinking a lot about this idea of epistemic communities, because how is it that a group of very disparate people working in different parts of a system in different parts of the world all leverage around a common goal? And I think it says something about maybe medicine as an epistemic community. We share certain codes of ethics. We learn the same sorts of things. In fact, we learn the same things. We have a common understanding really of the body to a large degree. And we follow the same sort of practices, codes, even organizational structures. Most countries really have primary care, and then they have hospitals and public health and so on. So when it comes to climate change, something big is changing. And I think it then returns to the questions, which is, what's actually happened is at the beginning, medicine has really been about the patient in front of you. So all of our codes of practice are do no harm, and that really has always meant do the best you can for the patient in front of you. That same phrase, do no harm, is now being leveraged as a means of action on the climate. Do no harm through your practice. Do no environmental harm. Do no harm as far as you can to biodiversity. Produce no plastic waste. Do no harm is really extending its range. And it's no longer just about not harming the patient in front of you. Now, on a single person doing it, of course, that's a relatively minor thing. But when it starts happening at scale, that's a real transformation in how this community of people think about their role and their relation to one another. And just to finally wrap up my initial remarks is that, even when I trained, I guess I started medical school about 15 years ago, it really was about the patient in front of you. I was always interested in global health. I was always the one asking, what about this, what about that? And now I feel actually this global dimension is really there, and people all over the world are bringing it to the heart of their practice. And I said it was my final thing, but final is I had the fortune of spending a year last year studying at Harvard University. And that was on a program bringing together scholars, many of whom were doctors from around the world, and we learned together. I had the fortune to learn alongside people who studied medicine, yes, but in very different circumstances to me, including a friend and colleague, indigenous from Peru, who had studied medicine in Peru. And of course, she had the kind of same training as I had, but brought lots of different perspectives to this issue. So I think it's not clear-cut that we're all agreeing and talking about the same thing. This is an emerging phenomenon. I'm looking forward to following it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jan?
Thanks. Yeah, I noticed that no one in the panel raised their hand when you asked who knew what epistemic communities were. So I'm not the only one. Maybe very quickly on my background, I trained as a theoretical physicist, and I really loved it. But then I changed to climate change because I thought there was a need for better understanding of climate, and there was the urgency, so sort of purpose-driven change of community. And then I realized that we understand climate well enough to act, and we're still not. So now I'm working on quantifying climate justice in order to inform international negotiations and hopefully go for a fairer world where we can have more efforts from countries that can do the most. And I'm trying to see where I can be the most useful in producing that knowledge. And I could notice, obviously, that the world is behaving very irrationally, that climate change will hurt us all, also in the countries that have the power to avoid it. And so I've been trying to bring that skills of natural scientists in really bringing rational thinking, trying to highlight where are the opportunities, what we risk, do some prospective thinking, try to inform decision makers. And it's really been really interesting. And so I try to bring that also to courts and in expert reports and try to, as neutrally as possible, bring the numbers so as to inform decision makers on the decision making. And of course, they have to take into account plenty of other dimensions, but trying to bring the best available information the most transparently possible. But when I look at the effect of this, I see some improvements, and a lot of the models that we have and that my colleagues are producing on what the world should do in order to decarbonize emissions, they're still very much, they're very rational model. They're actually purely quantitative model, and they're sometimes very little understood as to what are the value judgments that go into them. But they're also very much based on the current understanding of the world, mostly as it's shaped today, without much regard for what has been traditional knowledge that wasn't necessarily always entirely rational, but that gave value to what it could not necessarily quantify in all possible ways. And I think this is where I see the limit of the epistemic community. So I do try to bring better numbers, or the numbers where they are missing, but I do see that it's still very much of an approach that's within the current system, that's not transformational. We can see in the projections from the IPCC that it's still possible to avoid 1.5 degrees of global warming, still within the world that the type of economic world we have today. But I'm thinking that we're missing a lot of opportunities on thinking much more transformationally, also to question the effects we have on other things than climate change, biodiversity, indigenous rights, many questions that we're not tackling. So I feel that, the interdisciplinarity has a great effect as it's normed already today, and including in the academic community. But I'm very much looking forward to hear other perspectives that are usually given less prominence or less influence on policies that really like having numbers more than principles. So yeah, I'll leave the floor now.
Thank you so much, Jan. Of course, from our studies of climate litigation, we know that the making the connection, direct connection between climate change, the effects of climate change and human rights has been really a game changer. No, for example, the connection with the violation of the right to health, or the right to life, or the right to private family life, as it is in the European context, has been really a game changer, and has been so useful to really hold states to account for their emissions or for their mitigation and adaptation policies. So this really was very important, and also the IPCC reports have been fundamental in improving the chances of holding states to account, and the attempt to hold private companies also to account for climate change. But this is not the whole story. So this is when I want to ask Moira to tell us a little bit. So I'll say this in English, and then voy a decirlo en inglés y después en español para ti. To ask her about what she thinks about this idea, this notion of epistemic communities, and its role in the whole climate change conversation. And also to tell us, how does she think these epistemic communities should be analyzed from a critical perspective, improved? What can we learn apart from the right to health and better numbers and better IPCC reports? Moira, entonces la pregunta para ti, después de que Esmeralda introdujo el concepto de comunidades epistémicas, y los colegas nos contaron también sobre el trabajo que han hecho desde el área de la salud, la medicina y las ciencias naturales para contribuir como a un mejor conteo de emisiones y cómo se le puede pedir a los estados que mejoren sus políticas y sus leyes climáticas. Pensamos que esto no es el panorama completo, ¿cierto? Se han ido agregando nuevos campos de conocimiento científico, pero no, quizás no sea el panorama completo. Entonces la pregunta para ti es, ¿qué piensas de este concepto, esta noción de comunidades epistémicas y cómo lo ves o qué piensas que podemos hacer para completarlo, mejorarlo o qué hacemos con eso?
Mari Compuche, Mapuche Tainche, Incheacun Puelwi Mapumeu. Bueno, soy de la nación mapuche, vengo de la Puel Mapu, hoy llamada Argentina, Patagonia, Argentina.
You can, okay. So Moira is from the Mapuche nation in the Patagonian, from Argentina.
Bien, creo que mucha terminología que son neologismos que están siendo instalados en los movimientos sociales, en los movimientos por la lucha, lo que yo llamo contra el terricidio. Estos neologismos encierran una perversidad política.
So she thinks that there's a lot of neologisms, like new words and concepts that have been installed in new discussions that, how do you say?
Una perversidad política.
That entail some perversity in political terms.
Y también es un reflejo de la hipocresía del sistema.
And there's a reflection of hypocrisy of the system.
Comunidades epistémicas, cuando parte de la colonización produjo epistemicidio, genocidio y epistemicidio en todos los territorios.
So the question is, if an epistemic community, what's that for? If colonization processes brought already the killing of different forms of knowledge, like epistemicide, that would be something like that.
Este reduccionismo es intencional.
And she thinks that the reductionism of those concepts is intentional.
Y es negacionista.
And it's also a form of denial.
Porque no quiere asumir que ha sido el hacedor del asesinato de otras formas de entender la vida.
Because they don't want to assume that they are responsible of killing other ways to see life.
Como pueblos indígenas, gran parte del activismo de los pueblos indígenas, no queremos ser integrados a estos modelos de comunidades epistémicas.
So indigenous peoples don't want to be integrated in those models of epistemic communities.
Queremos que nuestra forma de entender el mundo desintegre este sistema de muerte.
And on the opposite side, we would like to disintegrate that system that creates, that it's a system of death.
Cuando nosotros hablamos de epistemologías, hablamos de saberes ancestrales.
So epistemologies for us are types of ancestral knowledge.
Estos saberes ancestrales nos construyen un modo de relacionarnos con el cosmos de manera armónica, recíproca.
So ancestral knowledge is a way to relate to the universe in a more harmonic way.
Entonces, justicia climática es otro perverso reduccionismo.
So climate justice is very reductionist and it's very perverse.
Nosotros tenemos que volver a emplazar en la conformación de un nuevo modelo civilizatorio.
What? ¿Qué necesitamos emplazar?
Sí, necesitamos emplazar el concepto de reciprocidad con la tierra, reciprocidad y respeto con todas las vidas.
So what we actually need to do is to locate and give a central place the idea of reciprocity between people and earth and life.
Este sistema se ha acostumbrado a diseccionarnos.
The system has dissectionated, that is a word, right? Yeah.
Y somos una integralidad.
And we are an integrality.
Cada aspecto de nuestra vida se ensambla con otras.
So every part of our life has relations, organic relations with other parts.
Y sí, todos los dolores y todas las vidas importan.
So, and yes, and that means that all the pain and all lives matter.
Esta creencia de que vamos a poder abstraernos de la masacre de los pueblos, del asesinato de las mujeres, del asesinato de las diversidades, pero vamos a salvar el ecosistema, es un absurdo.
So it's absurd to think that we're going to save the system, like in terms of climate change and ecosystems, and that's going to make us not responsible for femicide, for violence against different peoples and indigenous peoples and women, etc.
Hemos acuñado un nuevo concepto al que llamamos terricidio.
So there's this new concept that you have that she has coined, that it's terricidio, which is like terricide referred to earth.
Es la forma en que el sistema asesina todas las vidas y los modos de vida.
And it refers to a cosmic crime that entails different forms of cutting off life expressions by the system. So,
entonces, por ejemplo, cuando hablamos de luchar contra el ecocidio, pero no nos pronunciamos frente al genocidio de los pueblos indígenas o a las lenguas que van desapareciendo o a las espiritualidades que son perseguidas, estamos generando terricidio.
So when we talk about climate change, but we don't say anything about the genocide against indigenous peoples, the way in which we are killing the languages of indigenous peoples, and also the way in which spirituality, different spiritualities have been prosecuted. So then we are, how did you say? ¿Cómo dijiste que el efecto es?
Estamos apoyando el terricidio.
So then we are committing terricide
Si permitimos esa desintegración de temas.
because of the disintegration of different topics.
Estamos planteando que es urgente, imprescindible reaccionar y actuar contra el terricidio.
So it's an urgent task to act against all those actions that the terricide entail.
Pero no queremos hacerlo desde ese activismo de no a esto, no a aquello, sino a qué le decimos sí.
So we don't want to do that saying we shouldn't do this or that, but quite the opposite. What are the things that we're going to say yes?
Y le decimos sí al buen vivir como derecho.
And to the buen vivir, what's a good translation for buen vivir? There's like for a good life, good living.
Como derecho.
As a right. She's coming to.
¿Y qué es el buen vivir para nosotros? No es lo que dicen los estados-nación. El buen vivir es restablecer la armonía cósmica.
So buen vivir is a way to reestablish the cosmic energy rather than to say yes to the actions of the nation states.
Los pueblos indígenas sosteníamos modelos civilizatorios que resguardaban el orden cósmico.
So indigenous peoples used to have civilian models or civilizatorian models that restored the cosmic order.
Y los estados-nación llevan adelante o sostienen un modelo civilizatorio que resguarda el orden institucional.
And on the other hand, nation states have this order that keep
Que resguardan el orden institucional.
that keep an institutional order.
El nombre de ese orden institucional: matan pueblos, asesinan la tierra, contaminan los ríos, todo en nombre de ese orden institucional. Ese orden institucional se traduce en violencia contra quienes queremos resguardar el orden cósmico.
So in the name of that institutional order, nation states kill indigenous peoples, kill rivers, and they exercise violence in the name of that institutional order.
Si ustedes me preguntan si hay un modelo de democracia que sea útil, que pueda salvarnos de esta crisis civilizatoria, yo les diría no.
So if you ask me if there is a model of democracy that can save us from this crisis, I would say no.
Los pueblos telúricos debemos recuperar la terra caracia.
So telluric peoples need to recover the terracracia, which is like the idea of like instead of having democracy, right? Then you would have some sort of system based on the energy of the earth. ¿Sí? Como la energía de la tierra. La terracracia.
La terracracia sería algo más político, como si dijeras, en vez de demo, que es el pueblo gobernando, la tierra gobernando.
Yeah, so it's instead of having the people governing like in democracy, then you would have the earth governing.
Earthcracy, algo así. Es importante que empecemos a nombrar nuestra realidad y nuestra lucha por fuera de los conceptos que la academia extractivista, la academia cómplice con el terricidio, nos impone.
So we need to start naming things in a different way. So we need to start using different concepts out of the extractivist, the typical extractivist activity in academia. And then so we need new terms to name things.
Los pueblos telúricos debemos volver a ensamblarnos por la vida.
The telluric peoples need to assemblage, rejoin towards and in protection of life.
Es posible generar alianzas con nuevas tecnologías, pero tecnologías que nos lleven hacia el buen vivir.
So it is possible to build alliances with technologies, but those alliances and technologies should be driven and be directed to the buen vivir, to the good living.
Debemos negarnos a seguir reciclando este sistema.
So we need to deny the recycling of this system.
Basta de hablar adaptación al cambio climático, integración a estos modelos. Todas esas categorías son tramposas y nos llevan a la resignación.
So climate change, climate adaptation are like tricky categories. So they lead us to the resignation and not to the transformation.
Construyamos realmente el modelo de sociedad que nos merecemos y que los terricidas han hecho o nos han negado históricamente, digamos, los terricidas históricamente han negado el modelo de sociedad que nos merecemos, todos los pueblos del mundo.
So terricides have denied the model of society that we deserve. Then we should work towards that model of society, like independently from what the terricides have been doing.
El reformismo no va a sanar la relación con la tierra. Necesitamos pensar una justicia climática, una ciencia, una salud que nos lleve a la sanación. Esa es la palabra que debemos emplazar en la agenda política y en nuestras acciones, la sanación cósmica.
Oh no. Es que oh no.
Pueden ayudar.
Yeah, she says that reformism and legal reform is not gonna cure the relation with Earth. So we need to work on how to cure and how to be healthy. That sanación is just a different word. Healing. Well, but it's more like, it's like curing, it's more curing, no? So we need to work towards curing our relationship with Earth rather than be thinking about legal reform as a way to do that, to be in a good society.
Thank you so much for this. We have only 5 minutes, but I think we need many wine sessions and dinners and lunches to talk about this. So I would like to open up for maybe a couple of questions from the public before we close. 5 minutes now.
I want to thank the panel for a really important topic and discussion. And particularly thinking of Moira's contribution is so important because so much of what is said about climate crisis and actions is futures oriented, right? It's a discussion about science and it's a discussion about economics, when actually it's a long run discussion about colonial modes of extraction and harm. And so I think, you know, there's a question about timeframes and references and how to reorient the debate around climate crisis, which I would like to hear at some point, not in this 5 minutes, from the panel about. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel.
Hi, my question is also for Moira. Voy a decirla en español y después en inglés. Quería saber si nos puedes compartir un poco sobre el debate que se dio cuando estuvieron platicando sobre el terricidio como una forma de crimen de lesa humanidad y de lesa naturaleza. ¿Qué les llevó al debate de judicializar eso, digamos, de volverlo un derecho y tal vez no, o tal vez no? Quería saber eso. I wanted to know what are the debates around the terricide concepts in Argentina as a form of, how do you say that? Crimes against humanity and nature, and how that could or not become a legal figure. Thank you.
Joanna.
Thank you so much for the amazing panel. My name is Sofia. I'm from FGV in São Paulo. I also have a question for Moira. Quería escucharte un poco más cuando decís sobre eso de hacer alianzas con las tecnologías, pero en una dirección para el buen vivir, o sea, qué tipo de tecnologías pensás, y por supuesto que hay tecnologías que pueden ser utilizadas en una dirección o en otra, entonces cómo direccionarlas en este sentido. Just to hear more about Moira's take on how to use technologies in a way that guide us towards buen vivir and what kind of technologies she has in mind.
Thank you, Sofia.
Thank you so much. Very interesting panel. I'm Namita Wahi from CPR in New Delhi. And I just wanted to echo what Moira said and wanted to add to what Rachel said about colonial extraction. I would add 2 more layers to that. So colonialism plus capitalism plus patriarchy. And I really liked what Moira ended with, which is the need to sort of heal the earth, because the indigenous communities in India, they have this concept of land, water, forest as an indivisible ecosystem. And the second layer is that humans are not separate from the environment, that we are part of it. So this whole idea of climate justice, where we are sort of trying to do something is still external from the environment, is still something which is not there within the discussion that happened here. And it's very interesting because like the whole concept of using an extraction is very much embedded within a patriarchal and capitalist framework as well. And unfortunately, the climate justice things that are happening, whether it's like, sustainability in corporations and, that sort of stuff, is also still operating within that capitalist, patriarchal, and extractivist lens. So if it's like extracting renewables from the earth, that is still displacing indigenous groups, because cobalt and lithium and nickel are also coming from the same territories that coal was. And that is, in fact, further creating these divides and the ability of, countries like India to say that we will defer net zero till 2070 because, we don't have the same burden as you, but continue coal mining within an extractivist setup. So thank you very much.
Tamita.
My question is to everyone. When I have read about epistemic communities and dominant knowledge, there seems to also be a call for decolonization. And it seems to be linked to heteronormativity and insensitivity to context, even though there may be good intentions, but which could easily be manipulated or make individuals or communities feel invisible or have elements of coloniality. do you feel that more could be done to incorporate more diverse perspectives?
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we need to close the discussion now, but I welcome you to approach the panelists during the day and during the week, and just hold the question of how climate law and policy is biased and how can we deal with that. Thank you so much.